questions and give it to BEBA team. Mike is over there, so if you please have any questions, give it to Mike. I would like to give the floor now to Khaled Nosseir, BEBA chairman, who is going to do the welcome remarks. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this special discussion organized in honor of His Excellency Sameh Shoukry, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Egypt and President-Designate of the COP27. We thank Minister Menshawy for taking the time to address BEBA, given his immense responsibilities during the Minister Shoukry, sorry. Wrong. For taking the time.
This is what you're given. Always the safest way.
I obviously have to start thinking. Given your immense responsibilities during these current crises that we're all facing, we hope Minister Shoukry will shed some light on COP27 and the current state of affairs. During the year, BEBA is organizing and planning a series of events in preparation for COP27, including our upcoming business mission to the UK in May. Before I give the floor to Dr. Menshawy, BEBA Vice Chairman, to introduce His Excellency Minister Shoukry, I'd like to welcome UK Ambassador to Egypt, Gareth Bailey, and Minister Ashraf Al-Arabi. Minister Mohammed Al-Arabi, former Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Ambassador Hatem Saif al-Nasr, former Ambassador to the UK, and former Ambassador Ayman Afaz, former Ambassador to Denmark. Thank you for joining us, and I'd like to thank our main sponsor for tonight's event, Mr. Insurance Holding Company, and to recognize our event partners, Care, CIP, Frasco, QNB Al-Ahli, and Nosseir Masr. Without further ado, I leave the floor to Dr. Magid to introduce His Excellency the Minister.
Good evening, distinguished guests. It is a great pleasure that I am introducing today His Excellency Minister Shoukry, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Egypt and President-Designated for COP27. His Excellency Minister Shoukry, before assuming his ministerial post in 2014, Minister Shoukry served as Egypt Ambassador to the United States of America from 2008 to 2012. He also served as Egypt Permanent Representative to the United Nations in Geneva and other organizations from 2005 to 2008. Prior to that, Minister Shoukry served as Ambassador to Austria and Egypt Permanent Representative to international organizations based in Vienna, including the International Atomic Energy Agency and the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization from 1999 to 2003. Please join me in welcoming His Excellency Minister Shoukry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Khaled. I'm delighted to be here with all of you today, and thank you all for coming. And it's a pleasure to be at this special event organized by the British Egyptian Business Association, which is its inception in 1996, continues to play an important role in enhancing and advancing trade and business between Egypt and the United Kingdom, contributing to growth and economic development and reflecting the comprehensive nature of Egyptian-British business relations. This doesn't work at all levels. Our two countries are no strangers to cooperation on addressing climate change, both in the multilateral climate change process as well as through bilateral cooperation. Egypt and the United Kingdom have closely collaborated since early 2019 on the adaptation track of the UN Climate Action Summit, successfully launching a comprehensive package of climate initiatives, many of which garnered support from business and multinational corporations worldwide. It continues to attract participation of important global key actors on climate change through the Adaptation Action Coalition, co-chaired by Egypt and the United Kingdom. On the bilateral level, Egypt and the UK continue to cooperate on a multitude of fronts, including the investment of British businesses in the renewable sector, especially solar energy and the BEBA solar park. This year is especially significant for both our countries as it sees the baton of global climate leadership passing from the United Kingdom to Egypt. I had the pleasure of receiving Minister Sharma, COP26 President, here in Cairo in January, where we reaffirmed our commitment to enhancing global climate action and pushing for further ambition on mitigation, adaptation, and finance. At COP27, we intend to build on the success achieved under the UK leadership in Glasgow, directing what remains of this critical decade towards actual implementation at scale, pushing forward the global climate agenda on all fronts and ensuring that the world is put on the right track to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. But in order for us to get where we want to be, we need the contribution of all actors. While it is generally recognized that climate action is primarily the responsibility of governments, yet there are other actors that are very important in the process and that can hugely contribute to governmental efforts in this regard. The global business community is one of these actors. I'm glad to be here today with the representatives of some of the biggest and most influential Egyptian and British businesses and corporations. I can only see the potential benefits that can be achieved by tapping into Egypt's ongoing green transition, sharing and forging Egypt's future in renewables, solar, wind, green hydrogen, green transport, and low-carbon industries, among others. The political will is strongly available. The legislative framework is in place, and nothing should keep you from contributing to this global effort through supporting Egypt's low-carbon development pathway. Ladies and gentlemen, as President-Designate of COP27, I will spare no effort to ensure that all stakeholders are well engaged and that businesses that are willing to demonstrate commitment in addressing climate change through their policies, practices, and contributions are all given the necessary space and platform to showcase their work. I also invite you to engage with our recently appointed climate champion, who through the Marrakesh Partnership for Global Climate Action is mandated with enhancing our communications with non-party stakeholders relevant to the global fight against climate change. I'm sure you all know and have experienced the dedication of the caliber of Dr. Mahmoud Mohyeddin and his ability to actively engage with the various sectors, the business community in particular, and financial institutions to be able to guarantee a successful outcome of COP27. I thank you and I look forward to our discussion tonight, which I'm sure will contribute to our efforts and endeavors in months ahead as we prepare for an inclusive COP in Sharm el-Sheikh. Thank you again for the invitation, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
We'll start the question with His Excellency Minister Shoukry.
We already have a few questions that were sent, so until somebody from the floor, they've already sent some questions in writing. The first one, Your Excellency, your opinion about what the most important outcomes of COP26 were and how Egypt can build on the momentum for COP27.
Absolutely, COP26 is recognized widely as having achieved a momentum in terms of climate change and dealing with the challenges. It having been convened in the first place after the postponement because of the COVID was important that this was a renewal of participation by the international community in the efforts to address the challenges related to climate change. And what was achieved there in maintaining the ambition and finalizing the work program of the Paris Agreement and any issues that were relegated to COP26 from COP25 were all important. Maintaining the concentration and the emphasis on the temperature goal of 1.5 degrees was also very evident, as was the commitment to phase out coal in terms of those main countries that depend on coal for power generation. So in terms of what we hope to achieve is to address this COP as an implementative COP, one where past commitments will be fully undertaken, where countries who have not revised and enhanced their NDCs will do so, but will do so in all of the areas of concern, whether it's mitigation, adaptation, or finance, and that we will continue to maintain the momentum in COP26 that was created in COP27, which was created in COP26, and thereby move the agenda forward in implementation and in providing both advanced efforts by all countries in the field of mitigation, but also in greater awareness of the global goals on adaptation and, of course, the provision of finance, meeting the finance goal of 100 billion and moving forward on all of the areas that will be under negotiations.
Any questions from the floor?
I have also some questions for His Excellency. Excellency, how we can ensure the contribution of and encourage the private sector from Egypt and globally from all over the world to support the efforts to address climate change, reform, active participation? Thank you.
Well, there's a general recognition of the very fundamental and important role of the corporate world, of financial institutions, by the importance of corporate responsibility in addressing the challenges. And there's a receptivity in the COP process now to incorporate the business community, provide them the accessibility and provide them the ability to showcase and highlight their contribution. This contribution is fundamental because there are those companies whose emissions maybe exceed those of countries, and if they are to apply themselves in a responsible manner, then the challenges will not be met. So we believe that there's a role for governments in this endeavor, but also for the private sector, for corporations, to show commitment and to provide the policies and the incentives and the contributions in kind, both in assisting the developing world in the transfer of technologies, and at the same time in putting in place policies and targets that will be achievable and that will have a true impact on the climate change agenda.
Your Excellency, you mentioned finance. Africa contributes 4% of global CO2 emissions, yet it is the most vulnerable continent. And climate finance, of course, is a key concern for developing countries. How will COP27 help close this financial gap?
Well, certainly the financial gap and also the ambition to address the issue of the finance goals of 2025 is going to be an important segment in COP27. And I think here again, it is to ascertain and to maintain the political commitment by especially the developed countries in recognition of the common but differentiated responsibilities, which is a principle endorsed and which is maintained in the United Nations Framework Agreement on Climate Change. This is a work in progress, but we certainly see a deficiency in the level of implementation of the developed world in fulfilling the obligations in creating the financial packages that are necessary for both mitigation and adaptation. Certainly, I won't speak about maybe the totality of the developing world, but certainly in Africa, which only contributes all of the countries of Africa. And despite, of course, that countries like South Africa, maybe and Nigeria and Egypt, because of the size of their economies, does contribute to emissions, but overall, 2% of emissions, as was mentioned, is only attributed to the African continents. Thereby, we didn't create this problem. This problem was created by those who had the opportunity of creating economies of scale that have provided a beneficial situation for their populations in terms of development and advancement, but has created a challenge of an existential nature for all of us. Thereby, we have to maintain the commitment that this is a common objective, common challenges that we all have to face, but there is a responsibility on those who have the resources, who have the ability to enhance the capabilities in the developing world by providing the finance for transition to clean energy, for innovation, and for mitigation and adaptation. We are currently suffering with erosion of shores in all of Africa, and this will need money because there are consequences related to the problems of adaptation, problems of security, conflict, of migration. All of these issues will impact the world collectively. So it's not just a matter of dealing with the specific issues of climate change, but also the repercussions and consequences of a deterioration and of the climate agenda. The transfer of technology is important, and I think many in the developing world have indicated their commitment, their dedication to address the challenges, but they do need the support of their partners, especially those of the developed world who have the capability to finance the innovation. And I'm going to say that in the developing world and in Egypt, we have seen, and I think Khaled and I attended yesterday, the launching of the EBRD strategy, where we did see the contribution of various Egyptian companies, small, medium-sized companies, who have shown a commitment to dealing with not only advancing their economic prospects, but also doing so in a responsible and effective manner.
Excellency, we received a question also. What is your assessment for the current situation worldwide level and how it affects the international climate negotiation in the coming period till we reach the conference of Sharm el-Sheikh, COP27.
The geopolitical situation is certainly strained at this time, and it's an understatement, I know. But since I'm President-Designate, I have to deal with a degree of caution here. Certainly, the polarization that exists can easily be transferred into the negotiating process, where the objectives become less those of the common responsibility, but more in terms of reflection of the divergence in views and the rivalry that exists, and utilizing or taking advantage of the opportunity to, let us say, show the ability to address the issue from the perspective of national interests rather than from the collective global interests. So we certainly hope that conditions will relax during the coming months, and that again we will be able to regain the momentum and the cohesion and the common political will that does not disrupt the negotiating process, but that enhances the momentum and the ability to achieve results that will have an impact. I think this, again, is a matter of an existential nature, and it's not going to really count very much if we find ourselves within the coming decade that there is a deteriorating world for our children or our grandchildren. It's not going to really matter who's right and who's wrong, but what will matter is the very dramatic changes that could take effect in the global environment and the effect on all individuals within the coming decade or two. Again, we have to rely on the science, and the science is very clear. And if we do not take heed of the warnings that the scientific community is now providing us, and we concentrate on the differences that exist, the world will be in a very dire circumstance.
Definitely, I mean, Your Excellency, it's a valid point, because all these crises will not compare to the actual existential crisis of the climate change. Again, most of the questions, of course, are circling around the status of the Ukrainian-Russian crisis and the consequences that could have on COP. But the other thing is regarding the availability of funding and the availability of financing, especially for Africa and developing nations that cannot carry the burden of financing the adaptation to really reach the goals set out.
There's certainly a degree of disappointment within the developing world related to the degree of implementation, especially in the area of finance. Until now, the goal that was set in Paris, the 100 billion, has not been fulfilled. This in itself is somewhat indicative of a problem that has to be addressed. Again, we are hopeful that the momentum and the recognition that was generated in Glasgow might have an impact in countries stepping up and implementing their commitments and obligations and meeting the finance goals as it relates to 100 billion, but also in showing their resolve to increase that ambition for the 2025 goal. But here, the potential for the corporate world to step in. Again, we hear, and I think rightly so by many of our partners, that there are trillions of dollars of potential investments in what is being viewed as a very lucrative area of cooperation, of investment in green technologies that can open the door for a continued sustainable development worldwide. And I think Egypt is a good example of the benefits of moving quickly towards clean energy, renewable energy with the solar, wind, the potential for now in terms of transport in the area of electric, whether cars or trains, rail systems. This is the perspective for the future. And those who come into these investments early on will gain the usual additional benefits. So there is an appetite, and there are the finances and the resources available. They have to be directed, and they have to, I think, also recognize that there's a ability for implementation for a country like Egypt, which is quite considerable, and I think is to be praised and applauded. The ability to have created the largest solar park in the world. The objective, we have exceeded our expectations by 2030, rather than having 30% of our energy energy mix in 30% renewable. It's going to be about 42%. So again, this is a matter of political commitment by the part of the government, the leadership, but also a recognition of the future. The future is for renewables, for green hydrogen. We have the resources, and these resources are available in most of the developing world, unlike the heavy concentration of population and small area mass in many of the developed countries. We have, unfortunately, an abundance of desert. 94% of our territory is uninhabited, and thereby provides an ability to expand in solar energy quite substantially, and thereby the more that the corporate world invests and those trillions are put to good use, there will be a good return and a beneficial return on the climate as well.
The other question from the floor is, what are the tools and channels that will be offered to the private sector to contribute to COP27? And how can the private sector support ending up with a successful COP27?
Well, traditionally there's always been the planning for the participation of the private sector, for corporations, to showcase their policies, their contribution, and being able to present through designated areas that will be allocated to them so that they can participate and highlight their impact in meeting the challenges of global change. There's also, of course, the direct support that's provided by many in the corporate world to the process itself in sponsoring the negotiating process and the conference. But again, it is the signing up all the initiatives that are usually presented by the host country, and it is our intention to showcase 2 or 3 major, both national and regional initiatives, specific projects that will be fully studied and recognized to be ready for contributions and investments on a commercial basis. here again, this is an area where both governments and corporations will have the opportunity to contribute directly to those initiatives that will be beneficial not only to Egypt but to the region and will have a direct impact in meeting the challenges of climate change.
I have to say that quite a number of businesses have expressed their willingness and their desire to learn more when it's time to have some announcements of how they can showcase and where and their initiatives, and also to see how they can contribute and participate. So they're all eager to
all of this information will be provided on the website subsequently as we get closer, whether in the procedures, the regulations, the various decisions that will be taken related to sponsorship, related to the presence in booths and also in direct sponsorship. So all of that information will be found subsequently on the website dedicated to COP27.
Excellency, there will be no World War III until November.
I'm glad to hear that.
This is, I'm sure, the question on everybody's mind.
Megan has just reassured us, so we're very happy.
Any more questions?
Yes.
Excellent.
Nosseir, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for coming this afternoon. It's a great honor for us to have some of your time on this subject. I just want to reiterate what I know you have heard from President Sharma, who's the current co-president, a man who feels the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. When he was here in January, he said to you very clearly that we are your partner, we are your friend. If there's anything we can tell you about the, shall we say, the challenges as well as the successes that we had, we're there to help Egypt, our partner. I very much hope that we all know and understand in the international community that polarization is not something that COP27 needs. I know my government will be very clearly separating these issues, because this issue that you are taking on as president is the most important of all. There's nothing more important to coming generations. If I could just reiterate one point that you have touched on, and that is the private sector's role. We discovered that for COP26, the real standout moment was the willingness and enthusiasm of the private sector to chase investable and bankable projects. And I would urge BEBA to seize the day on this topic, because when we say there's trillions, not billions, we mean it. There really are trillions out there. Mark Carney and his Global Financial Alliance for Net Zero is mobilizing trillions, but it should not just be in mitigation. We also heard very clearly it needs to be an adaptation as well. Mitigation is very bankable, and the rich world has done very well in producing investable proposals on mitigation. But we hear very clearly from Africa that adaptation and protection is just as important, as coming up fast as an agenda item. And I would say that here in Egypt, you have obviously adaptation requirements that you'll want to see backed by credible investors, but also you are a mitigation superpower surely in the coming, because you have the solar, because you have the wind, because you have the space you described, and you have the green hydrogen potential. So as your partner, as you embark on this extraordinarily difficult and complex challenge, you should know that we will be doubling down as a supporter both in the public space, but also in terms of private investment. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador. Let me say that I highly appreciate that I had the opportunity in January to receive President Sharma and his negotiating team, and I think we had a very productive round of consultations and discussions. There was a great deal of transparency and a common recognition that for us to move the issue ahead, then it is a matter of cooperation, and as outgoing and incoming presidents, it was very valuable for us to have the opportunity to listen to President Sharma and his team related to their experience, both logistically and substantively, to see how we can jointly move the agenda forward, raise the ambition, and have a smooth transition between presidents. And we are continuing that. There will be deliberations between the two technical teams in Bonn in the coming days. And we will continue to coordinate and cooperate, taking full advantage of the experience of President Sharma and his team in running a successful conference, both logistically and substantively, a negotiating process that brought about some very important results. And as it is usual, we'll be happy to gradually move the burden from his shoulders to ours at the appropriate time. But we will continue, of course, from a bilateral perspective to deal and to cooperate for our mutual benefits.
Any more questions or comments on the floor? Well, Your Excellency.
Thank you, Your Excellency. There has been a degree of whataboutism. Something is wrong with the mic, I'm so sorry. There's been a degree of whataboutism between the peoples and governments of the developed world and some of the major economies in emerging markets, especially in Asia. That got a little better in COP26, but my question to you, sir, is what is, in your role as in COP27, what are you going to do to smooth out some of the philosophical differences between thank you. The question was, in your role in COP27, what are you going to do to help smooth out some of the philosophical debates that have lingered since the Paris Climate Accords? That's A. The comment I would have is more local, which is that in our company as investment managers, we've been very happy to have a clear ESG policy that speaks to the environment. And the problem we're facing is that it isn't quite, not all parts of the economy are on the same page. So what I would maybe ask is, would part of the goals of COP27 be to put everyone on the same page as to what's needed, so that, you know, when all efforts made can sort of build into an ecosystem rather than be one-sided by certain parts of the economy and others not?
Confidence that exists between the various negotiating groups. And certainly we can simplify it by, again, addressing in two major groups, although there are distinctions and differentiations between them, the developing and the developed, and the issue of what exactly is the responsibility and how do we equitably share that responsibility. This has been an ongoing issue, a debate. It has been translated into legal language. It has been addressed through the negotiating process. And it remains, and I think we can maybe even simplify it more by addressing it in the context of confidence. To what degree is there confidence among the parties that each is shouldering the responsibilities, the common responsibilities, in a manner that in the end will have an impact on the challenges related to climate change. And I think, again, it is, well, this confidence can be heightened by, first of all, recognizing that we have to deal with this from a perspective of the scientific data that is available. That scientific data should be the main platform from which we all operate. That we cannot renegade what the scientists are telling us in terms of time frames to meet our presumed needs in whatever area, whether it's poverty alleviation or reaching our developmental objectives. So at all levels of the parties, whether developing or developed, there has to be a determination and a recognition that we have to apply ourselves on the basis of the science that is available. Now, the other issue is the implementation of the commitments made. We cannot go from COP to COP with commitments that are not translated into actual deeds, actual disbursement of finance and availability of technology. This is, again, a fundamental issue. And if we don't maintain the momentum of Glasgow in these areas, then we will be on a slippery slope. And once you lose confidence, it's very difficult to regain it. I think those are two very important aspects of how we can move forward. And if we don't rise to that recognition, then we are in a bad situation, and one that no matter how clever the negotiators are, they will be only moving in circles and providing us with paper that will not translate into the lives of individuals.
Was very insightful for all of us. My name is Khaled indeed. I'm PwC Egypt City Point. My question is very to the point. We want the private sector to contribute to, the road to net zero carbon. Do we expect to see any policies directed toward that? I.e., will there be a carrot and stick? Will we have incentives and maybe carbon tax? Or that's something?
I'm more interested in the international perspective, the obligations of the parties, and whether there is a possibility to. Incentives are always a welcomed approach. Taxation at an international level it might be somewhat problematic, but maybe a technical response here will be more enlightening.
Thank you, Excellency. There is no global carbon tax currently, but there are some countries and some groupings, like the EU, they already applied carbon tax indirectly or directly. And there is some sectors like civil aviation where they are having benchmarks, and based on that they will decide on how can they move on reducing emissions. This could be done either by carbon taxes or through carbon markets, which is still under consideration. Carbon markets, as the agreement are already in place, but they are not operationalized yet. So there are two approaches: either we go through carbon taxes, which is not a preferred option for many developing countries, and there is no global carbon tax as such, or we go through benchmarking and applying carbon crediting and carbon markets, which is agreement within the Paris Agreement itself. So I think this would cover part of the discussion.
In the end, at the global level, this would be a very complicated and arduous just to determine the basis and the regulatory framework that would apply and that would be deemed as impartial and fair. So I would think that maybe the developed world would apply a very exorbitant tax on emissions in the developing world at this stage. But then how do you really quantify all of this? It's very problematic. But for a local, for national regulatory frameworks, we certainly, if there's sufficient development, then I think a carbon tax, but maybe to begin by incentivization is going to be more productive.
Egypt could actually generate a lot of money by empowering a little bit more with the Environment Agency on greenhouse gases and fly tipping and all that sort of thing. What plans or what part of the Environment Agency are playing a part in COP?
I'm sorry, could you repeat? I didn't get the question.
Okay. The Environment Agency can generate a lot of money with fines, if you like, of fly tipping and people not using greenhouse gases. And the COP incentive, obviously, we need the Ministry of Environment to be heavily involved in it, the way I see it.
Well, I think we partially addressed that in that fines would be considered a form of taxation. So again, incentives are always more productive to again attract the trillions of investment and to provide the regulatory framework and legislative framework that can help in advancing and providing better opportunities for return of investment. So again, I think it's better to deal it from that perspective.
Your Excellency, my name is Karim Rifat. I am Chairman at Engage Consulting, a public policy and government affairs consulting firm. Of course, more proudly, I'm an ex-diplomat. You mentioned, Your Excellency, something very important, that the more important was to capture the technology related to net zero effects. And on this point, I have one question. Do we have any ideas to incentivize the developed world for the transfer of technology and any policies related in the pipeline for the simple stuff, patent registration or protection of climate change related technologies, copyright of researches related to climate change and so on. I think this will be the key attracting point to people to work on attracting technology.
Well, it's a very good recommendation. I hope that our partners, the developed world and the British ambassador is here, he could maybe promote that with his government to be able to relieve some of the restrictions. We've already gone through a part of that discussion when it came to the COVID and the copyright and the intellectual property related to dealing with a global pandemic. And the global pandemic is very similar to the issue of climate change. We can either live all together or die all together, and it's for us to choose. Thereby, if there are any means that can facilitate that we meet these challenges, especially in the areas of transfer of technologies and giving the ability. And transfer of technologies has never come to the detriment of those who have provided that technology. It always comes with a return as well. And I think we've seen that, and I can maybe refer specifically, it's not a direct transfer of technology, but when the Egyptian government was able to negotiate with the producer of the medication for the virus C and brought down the cost to an excessively low price, but then the company also was rewarded by the volume. So, and I think the same applies when it comes to transfer of technology that won't have an impact, but will also create a return because of the expansion of that technology and its application on a wider scale.
Your Excellency, thank you. It's Todd Wilcox. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of HSBC Egypt. The unlocking of private capital and finance, that sounds to be one of your priorities for COP27. What do you see as the critical elements leading up to COP27 and the negotiations you're entering into to help unlock the trillion?
Well, since the trillions are within the financial world, within the financial institutions, within the private sector, the corporate world, again, it's going to be a matter of recognition of the rewards that are associated. And here, nothing that can be done in a negotiating context will make that initiative be forthcoming. But it is the concentration and the provision of the various projects, attractive projects that within legislative and administrative frameworks around the world that can, I think, have the best impact in this regard. The whole process in itself incorporates the private sector, is eager to cooperate with it, highlighting the initiatives that are available and also encouraging countries to increase their NDCs, and within those NDCs, of course, they will have to live up to those standards, and to do so they are going to have to cooperate with the institutions that have the resources. So it's a win-win situation, and one that both parties have to engage in and explore sufficiently so that they can find the point of convergence.
Your Excellency. Thank you, sir. I'll just take the turn on the role of the private sector and the advocacy topic that my friend Karim had raised as well. I think there is the topic of the just transition, where the West and the developed markets owe a responsibility towards emerging markets in making sure that we are able to adapt better and to manage the transition better. And nothing manifests itself better than actually investing in the projects that help with that adaptation, and the cost of finance is a key ingredient that cannot go unnoticed to make those sustainable projects. So I think it's the banking community and the spending towards the net zero starts with enabling markets like our market, where we have the capability to deliver sustainable green fuel, but for us to develop the infrastructure that will be conducive to that massive production and the evolution of technology, this basic layer needs to be well funded with competitive finance. So I think this is an advocacy topic that we owe to the entire continent. So, thank you.
I can't agree more.
I mean, to add what Ayman just said, there is a principle that is sometimes applied, which says polluter pays.
We wish it was.
Unfortunately, it's not always alive.
We wish we had the recognition of that principle.
Well, I'm sure with the application of the recommendations of the various talks and so on, and the demise of fossil fuel and the rise, replacing it with renewables, I'm sure as Egypt we should be having a much better situation because of the abundance and what we have as resources for renewables. We thank Your Excellency for your time and your kind remarks, and for addressing our colleagues here. And we hope to see you soon again. And if I can ask you to join us for late lunch or dinner.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. I thank you all for being here. الله يخليك، ده كرم منك، كتر خيرك، الله يلعبك، اهلا بيك، اهلا بيك. ده صحتك، شكرا بخير، الله يخليك، ازيك ازي احوالك؟
جهزت التبادل الاجتماعي.
لا خلاص، ركبت السعوديه فتحت.
انت ازيك؟
انتهز لها فرصه نيجي نشوف سوا.
ده انا سعيد يعني وشرف ليا.
ربنا يخليك، شرف ليك. ايه؟ عامل رجيم عامل رجيم للبرازيل بس بقالي يعني كل 12 كيلو مش كتير. برافو عليك. بس هو المهم انك انت تستمر. الاستمرار هو اللي صحيح. والدكتور
انت اختفيت امبارح كده.
هو هيزعل هيزعل يا عم، اهم حاجه عامل هو
خد مكان باقي.